I was texting this guy before you came in, so you said you never talked to him. You can go ahead and say hi to him.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Colin?
Hello?
Congressman John Lewis.
How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. How you doing, brother?
Fine. Thank you for all of your work, for your leadership. You have touched me. You have inspired me. And to see you getting out there pushing and kneeling, you have done so much, not just for the American community, but for the world community. I said thank you. I admire you. I love you.
Thank you for paving the way for an opportunity like this to even happen. It's great to finally connect with you. I talk to Mr. B about you all the time. We have great conversations, so it's great to finally have this conversation and be able to connect.
That was the late, great John Lewis speaking with Colin Kaepernick back in 2018. The civil rights icon offering his praise to the man who has become the face of the modern-day fight against social injustice. Congressman Lewis will lie in state today as they pay their final respects to the legendary activist. On that note, joining us now is the man who introduced the two, the great Roland Martin. He's the host of Roland Martin Unfiltered, 6 p.m. Eastern. Correct me if I'm wrong, Roland, every single day. You can check him out on multiple platforms and YouTube. Roland, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for letting us air that clip in that special moment. And I just need to say one thing. That just highlights John Lewis's character yet again, how deferential and humble he was. With Colin Kaepernick, he ceases to amaze me. He's just such a class act in terms of how he conducts himself. But all right, that's enough for me, Roland. I want to hear from you. So please tell me this. Why was it so important for you to connect those two?
Well, it was interesting. Colin and I were actually texting on my way there, and I was talking to Congressman Lewis before the interview. I was doing these series of interviews in advance of MLK 50, which commemorated the assassination of Dr. King in April 2018. And so I called Colin before the interview, and he didn't pick up. So I went ahead and did the interview because we didn't have much time. And then he called during the interview. So I picked it up and I answered. That's why then we go to the conversation. And the fact that we even have it is a miracle because we had 3 cameras shooting this whole interview, and we put everything on our hard drive, and our hard drive crashed. We actually thought we lost this entire interview. And luckily, the only camera that survived was the one that was on John Lewis. I didn't need me. We needed him. So thank goodness for that. But it was really amazing. And what you saw there was you saw the appreciation between freedom fighters. And if you talk to, and I've talked to numerous civil rights activists and speakers in sports, when I got the Hank Aaron Award from Hank Aaron, and same thing, he said, "Hey, I've never met Colin, and I connected those two together, put them on the phone." And there is a connection between freedom fighters who understand the struggle and the sacrifice. And that's really what you heard there. And you hear the full clip. He actually invited Colin to come to D.C. He said there are a lot of members who would love to meet you and talk to you, and also young folks here. And so it really was an amazing moment.
Well, when Muhammad Ali refused induction into the armed services and refused to go fight in Vietnam, he was vilified by the mainstream, and the countercultural forces, of course, idolized him for it. But eventually, the winds shifted, and the prevailing sentiment was that Ali was a great American hero. When Colin Kaepernick originally tried to draw attention to police brutality, even though we have instances of it all the time, we didn't always have a pandemic that changed what was normal for people, and a moment like the George Floyd murder, that suddenly the winds shifted again, and Colin Kaepernick goes from vilified by the mainstream to now it's changing. No, actually, maybe he's a hero. What do you think Kaepernick's legacy ultimately will be?
Well, first, what you just described is the continuum for Black people. The reality is Dr. King was called a radical, even by Roy Wilkins, who ran the NAACP in 1959. Then, of course, we see what ends up happening. That's the history of Black people in America. In the moment, John Lewis was not deemed an American hero. Eric Holder and I were texting last week, and it was a photo of John Lewis, Reverend Joseph Lowry, Reverend C.T. Vivian, and Ambassador Andrew Young, and he said, Founding Fathers 2.0. And so that's America. What we do is in this country, we create these, what I call these civil rights mascots. We treat Dr. King like he's this bobblehead figure where we pull him out and like, oh my God, wasn't he so great? But in the moment, America hated them. And so I think what you're seeing with Colin Kaepernick, you have this whole new generation of athletes who are not the same as the guys, they were not the same as a Magic Johnson or a Michael Jordan, who were not emboldened to take these actions. To see athletes out there leading protests, players with the Boston Celtics and others, when you see what LeBron James is doing, giving $100,000 for the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, which is trying to get the right to vote back for people who were formerly incarcerated. That's what you're seeing now. And so what Colin Kaepernick did was he unleashed this thing inside of these athletes today, men and women, who say, you know what, we don't have to just be all about sports, all about the money. We can use our power to change this country, to rewrite the history and redefine America.
Well, Roland, Molly kind of pointed to it earlier about kind of the humility of Lewis and the way that he spoke to Kaepernick. But I think his approachability, like I had forgotten about this after he had passed, that he was in that Jeezy video for My President is Black, which is something that nobody would have expected your sitting congressman, let alone a man with the reverence that John Lewis possesses, to wind up doing. So from you and your experience with him, how important was that approachability that he had? Because he's this luminary figure, but also was close enough for a lot of people to like put their hands on.
And that's the most important thing. If we want to go biblical, the woman with the blood problem, if she could not touch the hem of Jesus, she would not have been healed. I say that because that's what it means to be able to reach somebody, touch somebody, talk to them. He made himself available. But that's what many of these figures did. Reverend C.T. Vivian and Lowry and Ambassador Andrew Young and so many others. They speak at places and they stop and talk to folks and they take phone calls and they're willing to engage the next generation. Because I think the problem for many of us today is we look at them as being 78, 80, and 85, and we forget they were 18, 19, and 20 years old. And so they understood what it meant for somebody to be able to show them appreciation. People forget the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's the organization that John Lewis was in. And we have to understand that James Foreman, who was the executive secretary of the organization, and actually I was just started reading his book again. His book was called The Making of Black Revolutionaries. That's important because what a Congressman John Lewis and what others realize is that when you look at present day, when you look at Tamika Mallory, then when you look at Linda Sarsour and Brittany Packnett and Tef Poe and folks all across the country, they are modern day John Lewis's, Diane Nash's, Septima Clark, James Orange's. And so they're doing the exact same thing. They simply pick the baton up and run their own race.
Now, the most tangible part of John Lewis's legacy was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which in 2013 was decimated by the Supreme Court. Right, exactly. I was going to say, pointing to your shirt, can you explain to people who are not as familiar with that, the significance of the Voting Rights Act and what has happened to it since?
Well, first of all, black people have never really had the same rights as white Americans. That is, the moment you're born, you have these. So we've had to pass additional laws to give black folks rights, which really were enshrined in the Constitution. A Constitution, remember, that was written when we were considered 3/5 of a person. And so the problem with the Voting Rights Act was, in order to even get it passed, it had to be, they had to affirm it every 25 years. And so what ended up happening was these southern states did not want the fact that they had to get federal permission. And so within the Voting Rights Act, you had to have pre-clearance. And so what ended up happening was all these different locales where they had a history of discrimination came to voting had to get approval from the federal government before they made any changes to their laws. They sued Shelby v. Holder decision. Eric Holder was Attorney General. That's why his name was on it. The moment the Supreme Court struck down that pre-clearance clause, which they deemed unconstitutional, these states went crazy passing voter suppression laws. You saw more voter ID laws. We have seen more than 1,000 voting locations shut down in the past 10 years. We have seen massive voter suppression being led by Republicans in this country. In North Carolina, they were so dastardly and evil, but the federal judges ruled that there was laser-like precision targeting black people. You even have folks removing folks from the rolls. And so what we are now dealing with John Lewis died fighting the very same thing he was nearly killed for on that bridge on Bloody Sunday. That march was about voting rights. It was about trying to get the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so what people need to understand, and this is why non-Black people, it's important what you're seeing in Portland and other places. Non-Black folks have benefited from this. If you're Asian and you get to vote in your native language, you got to thank Black folks, because that's a provision of the 65 Voting Rights Act. There's so many different things people have been able to benefit from that. And so all these Republicans who are praising John Lewis, I dare say to them, especially Senator Mitch McConnell, don't you dare praise Congressman John Lewis with a bill sitting on your desk to fix that Supreme Court decision. Anything you say to me is irrelevant and hollow, because that's how you honor that freedom fighter, by passing that law to fix it, so we don't have to have all of these problems with voter suppression in this country, which will impact us in November.
Roland, you bring up how a lot of oftentimes civil rights figures, and I think this applies to various kind of walks of life. When someone becomes old, they become they become caricatures to some people. You brought up mascots. Yep. No, these are three-dimensional people who were treated differently, not as heroes, when they were younger. And in the midst of creating this, what we now look at as mythology, but is in fact history, how important was it for you to make sure, because now he is gone, that an elder statesman like that was connected with Kaepernick? You know, while he's around, they can have that interaction. I think you bring up the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. At the SCLC, I mean, there were conflicts within the civil rights movement that eventually got worked out, so progress was made. And we see conflicts now where different people don't agree with Kaepernick, but these things can also be worked out, and lessons maybe can be taken from the past. So why was it important for you to connect them while there's still time?
Oh, it's hugely important because, again, I don't think people really understand how this mutual admiration society. For me, when I got a chance to first meet Harry Belafonte, even now, every time I get a chance to talk to Mr. B, and Colin Kaepernick referenced Harry Belafonte in that discussion with John Lewis, you're understanding that this is a man who connected with Paul Robeson, to Dr. King, to Nelson Mandela. And so it's important because you're still able to learn from them. You're able to glean so much. And there's this appreciation. And what it also signals to the wider audience is that you cannot try to create these schisms or these wedges, because a John Lewis showed his appreciation for a Colin Kaepernick, just like a Harry Belafonte showed his appreciation for a Carmen Perez and Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour and Philip Agnew and others. And so what that says is that that's the older generation saying, it's now your time, and I'm here with you. And that is so important, because too often we get locked into this old versus young. Oh, the old folks don't want to talk to the young folks. No, that's not true. It's where they can find a common ground and learn from one another. And guess what? There were some people who vehemently disagreed with Congressman John Lewis when it came to defund the police. And that was fine, but he still saw fit, a month before he died, to go down to Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C., to stand on that street with D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. That was his way of saying to all of America, I might be 80, I'm about to pass on, but I stand with this generation who are doing the exact same thing that I was doing, because what they're doing today is what John Lewis did, is what Reverend Jim Lawson did, is what Septima Clark, is what Fannie Lou Hamer, it's what so many soldiers, freedom fighters, we don't even know their names, did every single day.
Well, also, Roland, I think that it's easy for us, especially when we talk about Lewis, to kind of stop at 1965 and to stop at marching. But he was in Congress for over 30 years while he was there. What contributions did he make from that role that we should remember?
Well, I think one of the things that when you talk about what he did in terms of being able to impact other legislation, and see, one of the hardest things for people to understand, because I hear this all the time, like, oh, the rest of the Black Caucus, they don't do nothing. Congress doesn't do anything. The reality is very few members actually have their name on bills, but it's really the work that they do removing a certain line or removing something. And so his ability to be able to, again, drive home the issue of voting rights, of civil rights, of impacting that type of legislation is critically important. And so it's so many things members of Congress do we will never, ever see that really impacts their district and impacts their state and impacts the country as well. And obviously, people, when you see that monument of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, you have to also thank John Lewis. 15 plus years, he kept introducing that bill. And Senator Jesse Helms, that virulent racist from North Carolina, he kept blocking it. But here's something that people also don't realize. When Republicans were in control, it was Congressman J.C. Watt who stepped aside to ensure that Lewis's name was on that bill. The Republicans who were in control did not want that to happen. But J.C. Watt said, no, I will take my name off. Lewis's name should go on that bill when Republicans were in control. And so that monument, the most visited Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., that was something that John Lewis fought 15 years to actually make happen. And luckily, he was alive to see it built and to see it open.
No question. And let's not forget, he started this fight in his early 20s, arrested more than 45 times, always peaceful, and continued on until recently passing away. Roland, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this with this shirt on. What would you say to folks at home that say their vote doesn't matter, their voice doesn't matter? Can you please edify them on why it's so important that everybody must vote? Please.
Here's the deal, folks. There is no issue that impacts your life that voting does not have an impact. None. A politician has no role in it. Do understand that the birth certificate is a government document. Your death certificate is a government document. So this whole notion that, oh, I can go about my life without being involved in politics, you're absolutely wrong. If you care about education, if you care about the environment, if you care about economics, if you care about even that stop sign or a speed bump or getting new sewer systems or sidewalks. I think about my parents, Reginald and Imelda Martin with the Clinton Park Civic Club in Houston, how a small group of people said, we want to transform our neighborhood. That could not have happened if you do not have the right people in political office. If people sit at home and do not vote, it is shameful because what you're doing is you're letting somebody else make decisions for your life. That simply cannot happen. And so I don't care what the issue is. I don't care who you vote for, but you must make sure that you register, that you vote. If it's by mail, it's in person, does not matter, because if you don't vote, real simple, shut the hell up.
Roland, you are a wealth of knowledge. It's an honor to have you on the show. Roland Martin Unfiltered. You can check that out every day. It's a digital show available at 6 p.m. Eastern, a fresh new episode. Roland, appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Y'all take care.